Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into a story that, well, it really brings together some advanced technology, some, let's say, audacious scientific claims, and a truly complicated political reality.
That's putting it mildly. The sources you've shared, articles, papers, video, personal docs, they all seem to point towards this one technology, RALF1, and maybe more importantly, the very unusual situation of the guy who developed it.
Yeah, this is definitely not your standard tech development story. RALF1 is said to do everything from mapping geology miles underground
To, well, predicting almost anything based on some of these claims.
Right. But the whole narrative, as presented in these sources, seems heavily shaped by the developer's personal and political situation.
So our task today for this deep dive is really to unpack what these sources claim RALF1 can do, and then try to understand why some of its biggest potential, its boldest claims, might not be widely recognized or, crucially, independently verified.
And specifically look at the political reasons, as laid out in the material, that seem tangled up in all this.
Exactly. We're navigating some pretty intriguing claims and, frankly, a difficult personal situation based only on the sources we have in front of us.
Okay, so let's start unpacking. According to these documents, what is RALF1 sort of at its foundation?
Well, fundamentally, it's presented as a piece of software, an algorithm, really. It has a Russian patent number 201612711RF.
And developed by a Russian scientist, Vadim Chernov.
Correct. And its first main application, the one that seems maybe the most grounded in the sources, is geophysical.
Looking for oil and gas, other geological things deep underground.
Yeah, exactly. The sources claim it works from the surface down to 10 kilometers, maybe even deeper. It uses principles from electrical exploration methods.
Okay.
Things like measuring resistivity, anisotropy, that's properties changing with direction and polarization in the rock layers. It mentions a specific method, HRES-IP.
And the claims about its accuracy, even just in this area, are pretty specific. One source mentions 2 meters for identifying hydrocarbon saturation.
Yes, and there's that quote, supposedly from a Lukoil representative back in 2009. It talks about confirming a 2.1 meters thickness for oil saturation in a real-world test in Russia.
So for that specific geophysical application, the source is presented as having some track record of, well, pretty high precision.
That's the picture they paint for that initial use case, yes.
Okay, so it starts there, finding stuff underground, but then the sources describe a pretty major conceptual leap, don't they? This idea of RALF1 as a quantum observer.
Right, this is where it moves way beyond standard geophysics. The sources actually draw a line to, like, the famous double-slit experiment from quantum mechanics.
Where observing changes the outcome.
Kind of, yeah. The idea in quantum physics is that the observer plays a role. And the claim here, as presented, is that Chernov managed to replace that human or physical observer with software code, with the RALF1 algorithm itself acting as the observer.
Okay, that's a big claim.
It is. And this quantum observer function, according to the sources, is then supposedly linked to these incredibly broad predictive powers.
And it apparently doesn't need traditional computer simulations, which the sources say are limited by scientific stereotypes.
Well, that's the argument presented. The idea seems to be that by acting as this quantum observer, the software can somehow tap into information from complex open systems differently,
Yeah.
bypassing the limits of normal simulations.
And this allows it, again, according to the sources, to predict, well, almost anything.
The list is pretty extensive. Financial markets, crypto, oil prices. There's that claim about predicting a black swan event, like the 2019 Saudi drone attack.
Wow. Okay, what else?
Meteorology, medicine, predicting cell growth for personalized therapy, aiming to save lives, forecasting huge threats, meteorites, earthquakes, even wars and epidemics.
And connecting back to the political situation we mentioned, it's explicitly stated in the sources that it could predict the intensity and location of shelling in Ukraine based on past data.
Yes, and that specific capability was apparently noted as useful by Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council in September 2022. There's also a mention of Occam's razor, linking predictions, therapy, and stopping bombing somehow.
It's just... The contrast is immense, isn't it, between identifying oil layers with meter accuracy, which is advanced but understandable geophysics.
And then predicting global conflicts or acting as a quantum observer. It's a huge spectrum of claims. And those broader ones, they'd need completely different kinds of proof, wouldn't they?
Absolutely. Which makes the political backdrop we need to discuss even more significant, potentially as a barrier to getting that proof.
Okay, so this next part. It's really important context for understanding the developer's situation, as described later. But we need to be super clear. This comes from a specific video source featuring someone else entirely.
Not Chernov, not about RALF1 directly.
Correct. It's an example, provided in the sources, of the kind of intense political climate and the nature of the allegations of persecution that other sources claim are impacting Chernov.
Got it. So this video source, it features a Ukrainian individual, Ihor Mosicek, making some extremely strong accusations against the Ukrainian government.
Yeah, the language is incredibly harsh, calling President Zelensky green scum, for instance. He alleges direct threats, persecution, suggesting it goes beyond just official actions.
And he gives reasons for this alleged pressure, right? Including claims about supposed corruption within the government involving family members.
Yes, that classic line of political attack aiming to undermine trust.
There are also claims about soldiers feeling disrespected, referencing an alleged trip by the First Lady.
Again, hitting on sensitive points, especially during wartime.
And then specific money allegations. Something about Kolomoisky's funds at Monobank being mishandled, and a $40 million offshore transfer claim.
Right. These specific, though unverified, financial accusations are used to build that larger narrative of alleged corruption and wrongdoing.
It escalates quite a bit, with claims of fabricated criminal cases. He suggests the SBU, Ukraine's security service, is being pushed to create a treason case against him, even mentioning some supposed FSB network called Rhinoceros.
It really paints a picture of intense state pressure, alleged framing,
And he links this to that 2017 assassination attempt near Espresso TV.
He does. He claims that while the SBU initially pointed fingers at Russia after the 2019 election and leadership changes at the SBU under Bakanov, the investigation was deliberately stopped.
With fatal consequences alleged.
Yes. He claims a key witness from that bombing, a man named Anzor, or Vadinsky, who apparently had other information, was later killed in Vienna.
And the speaker alleges this happened because the investigation was halted.
Essentially, yes, implying that stopping the investigation led directly to the witness's death. He claims he has evidence for European agencies.
Okay, so just to stress this again for you, our listener, this video is one person's account. Serious, unverified allegations about threats, persecution, alleged corruption, and obstruction of justice within Ukraine.
Precisely. It's not about RALF1 or Vadim Chernov's. Its relevance here, based only on our sources, is as a vivid, though one-sided example of the kind of political environment and the types of accusations involving state pressure that other sources say the developer of RALF1 is caught up in. It really sets a scene.
Right. Which leads us directly to Vadim Chernov himself, the Russian scientist behind RALF1, and the specific political and legal troubles he's facing, according to these sources.
For the sources provide some background. Educated at Moscow State University, worked in Russia at Neftegaz, got a diploma from their Ministry of Natural Resources.
But he also worked in Ukraine.
Yes, for companies like Hornotska NGK, Compass Plast Nafta. And there's a connection mentioned through his company, Ukrainoftinvest LLC, to Genaftinvest via some other entities listed in property records, Sorozokol-Bizans.
He also has a Polish business setup. Geoboki, Geoservice, SPZOO.
Correct. And one source even includes his DNA ancestry results showing Slavic, Baltic, Scandinavian roots.
Which seems presented as maybe supporting his attempts to get residency elsewhere, like Poland.
Possibly, yeah. But his current situation, as described in the sources, sounds really precarious. He claims he's been professionally restricted in Ukraine for 11 years because he lacks residency status.
And he explicitly states he fears deportation back to Russia.
Yes, he says he faces a significant risk of that. And he claims that if he is deported, he'd face torture and death because of past pro-Ukrainian stances he took.
Okay, but here's where it gets really complicated, based on the sources.
There's a major contradiction presented. Alongside that claim of past pro-Ukrainian actions, he's also quoted, or it's stated, that he currently views all Ukrainians as enemies.
That's quite a statement, especially for someone seeking refuge or trying to work within Ukraine, presumably. It immediately flags issues of trust, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It's a profound contradiction laid out right there in the source material. He also claims he was effectively a political prisoner in Ukraine during 2022-2023.
And there's mention of a complicated travel history around 2014-2015, and some kind of personal conflict related to troops entering Donetsk back then?
Yes, adding to this already complex and contentious background.
So this whole personal situation, his nationality, his stated views, his legal limbo, the claims of persecution, this seems central to the missed opportunities for RALF1 that we're exploring.
It really does seem to be presented that way in the sources. All those factors combined, Russian national viewing Ukrainians as enemies, legally insecure, claiming persecution, all within that high-stakes political environment we glimpsed.
Including risks like potential propaganda exploitation if you tried to get help from, say, the Belarusian embassy, which is mentioned.
Right. All of that, the sources suggest, creates significant political barriers.
Barriers that could prevent the kind of independent testing and validation needed for RALF1's bolder claims to be accepted, especially in Ukraine itself, even though the NSDC saw some utility.
That really appears to be the core political reason presented in these documents for why those opportunities might be missed. His personal circumstances and political entanglements, as described, just make the trust and cooperation needed for validating such ambitious technology incredibly difficult, if not impossible.
The sources also note his attempts to find a way out seeking Polish residency, contacting Amnesty for advocacy,
And even considering that risky approach to the Belarusian embassy in Kyiv. It underscores the desperate situation he feels he's in, according to this material.
Okay, so the political backdrop and his personal situation are presented as huge hurdles. But what about the science itself? Could the missed opportunities also stem from the claims just being too hard to verify scientifically, even without the politics?
Well, the sources actually touch on this directly. They call some of RALF1's claims innovative and audacious. And then they explicitly state, and this is key, that independent verification of such affirmations is not explicitly provided in the sources.
So based purely on what we've read, there's no outside proof offered for those really big predictive claims like the quantum observer thing or market predictions.
Not presented explicitly in these materials, no. And there's even a specific data point within the sources themselves that kind of highlights potential scientific questions.
Are you talking about those graphs from the Poland study that used RALF1?
Exactly. That document includes some graphs plotting correlations, R-squared values between different parameters like transverse resistance and polarizability in their models.
And R-squared tells you how well the data fits the model, right? Close to 1 is good, close to 0 is bad.
Generally speaking, yes. And some of the R-squared values shown in those specific graphs are, well, they're extremely low, like 0.00009 or 0.0729, really close to 0.
Which suggests, for those particular data points at least, very little correlation. And that seems quite different from the high accuracy claims, like that 2-meter oil saturation thing mentioned earlier.
It does seem to stand in contrast based on those specific figures shown in that document. Now, that doesn't invalidate everything, but seeing data like that presented within a technical study using the technology, it definitely reinforces the need for thorough, independent scientific scrutiny, quite apart from the developer's political situation.
So it really brings us to a central question, based on everything in these sources, for you, the listener, to ponder. Are the biggest claims about RALF1 unverified, mainly because the developer's difficult political and legal situation in Ukraine physically prevents the needed independent testing?
Or does the apparent lack of widespread scientific acceptance, plus data points like those low R-squared values, suggest the claims themselves just require a much higher bar of proof before anyone could accept them, regardless of the political issues?
Or maybe it's both. A really tough mix.
It could easily be a complex interplay, couldn't it? Where the intense political situation makes rigorous validation incredibly hard to arrange.
While the extraordinary nature of the claims, and maybe some questions raised by the available data, mean that the need for that strict independent proof is absolutely massive.
Exactly. A need that's almost impossible to meet under the circumstances described.
It has certainly been a dive into a story with many complex interwoven threads.
Definitely. So just to kind of synthesize what we've pulled from these sources, we have RALF1 presented as this technology with a huge range of alleged powers, from plausible geophysics right up to quantum observation and universal prediction, all from one developer.
And its story, as told in these documents, is completely tangled up with the very complicated, very difficult, and highly political personal situation of its creator, Vadim Chernov, in Ukraine.
Including his Russian nationality, his stated antagonism towards Ukrainians, his legal insecurity, and his claims of being persecuted.
And the sources strongly suggest these factors, this political environment and his personal entanglements, are major reasons for the missed opportunities. Why the technology's more ambitious claims haven't achieved broad, verified acceptance.
Yeah, this deep dive, based just on these sources, really highlights how getting a technology from an idea to acceptance isn't just about the science, is it?
Not at all. It shows how geopolitics, personal circumstances, the sheer difficulty of proving really big claims, and issues of trust, especially in conflict zones, can all play huge roles.
It's a powerful and perhaps cautionary picture these sources paint.
Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
It was fascinating to explore.
And we'll leave you with a final thought, maybe something to mull over. How often might these intricate webs of international politics, personal conflict, and mistrust act as unseen barriers, potentially stopping scientific or technological advancements, regardless of their actual merit or potential utility, from ever being fully realized or accepted?